Blood on Italian marble doesn't stain if you wipe it up with club soda before it sets. Nora knew this because it was her job. She wasn't a cartel assassin or a mob enforcer. She was a housekeeper. Keeping her head down and her mouth shut, paid $40 an hour cash. But tonight her boss didn't need her to scrub away the sins of his syndicate. He needed something far more dangerous. He needed a wife. Dust motes danced in the late afternoon sun, streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse. Nora pushed the microfiber cloth across the mahogany credenza. She didn't look at the skyline. The skyline belonged to people who owned things. Nora only cleaned them. Footsteps echoed in the foyer. Heavy, uneven. Gabriel Falco dropped his suit jacket onto a mid-century modern chair Nora had just lint-rolled. He didn't notice. Men like Gabriel rarely noticed the mechanics of their own comfort. He loosened his silk tie, yanking it until the knot gave way, and poured 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on the bar cart. Nora kept dusting. Rule number 1 of working for a man who imported unregulated shipping containers through the docks: be furniture. Be invisible. Gabriel downed the scotch. He rubbed the bridge of his nose. Did the dry cleaner drop off the velvet suit? In your closet, Mr. Falco. Nora said, her voice flat-practiced. Left side. Wrapped. He grunted. He poured another drink slower this time. The ice clinked against the glass. The sound was loud in the cavernous room. Nora moved to the coffee table, gathering empty espresso cups from his morning meetings. Meetings that involved men with broken noses and custom tailoring. Cancel the dinner reservation for tomorrow, Gabriel said suddenly. Done. He turned to face her. He looked awful. The sharp, aristocratic angles of his face were blurred by exhaustion. A faint bruise bloomed along his jawline, yellowing at the edges. Stop moving for a second, Nora. She froze. The espresso cups rattled softly against the saucer in her hands. She set them down. She didn't look at his eyes. She looked at his collarbone. Eye contact was an invitation. She didn't want invitations. I have a sit-down tonight, Gabriel said. He leaned back against the bar cart. With the Castellanos. Nora nodded once. She knew the name. Everyone in the city knew the name, though they pretended they didn't. The Castellanos ran the north side. Gabriel ran the south. They didn't have dinners. They had negotiations disguised as dinners. Old man Castellano is bringing his family, his wife, his daughters. He's pushing this narrative of family values to the commission. Gabriel let out a bitter, humorless laugh. He wants to see my stability. Thinks because I'm 35 and single I'm reckless. Thinks I'm a liability. Nora remained silent. It wasn't a question. I told him last month I was engaged. Nora blinked. That was a lie. She managed his schedule, his laundry, his life. There was no fiancé. Just a revolving door of high-end escorts who left before breakfast, leaving behind nothing but the smell of expensive perfume on the sheets. I need a fiancé by 8 o'clock, Gabriel said. His voice dropped. It lost the fatigue and gained that hard metallic edge that made grown men sweat. Nora picked up the cloth again. Should I call the agency Mr. Falco? The usual service? No. He shook his head. Castellano's people have eyes everywhere. If they see an escort walking into a family dinner, the deal is dead. They'll take it as an insult. It has to be someone real. Someone who doesn't look like she's on the payroll for the hour. He was looking at her now, intently. Nora felt the hairs on her arms rise. She wore a simple black dress, a white apron, her brown hair pulled into a severe bun at the nape of her neck. She was invisible by design. Gabriel set his glass down. He took a step toward her, then another. He wasn't a tall man, but he filled the space. "Can I borrow you tonight as my wife?" The question dropped into the quiet room like a lead weight. Nora met his gaze. His eyes were dark, tired, and desperate, but it was a calculated desperation. "I'm your housekeeper," Nora said evenly. "You're a woman who knows how to keep her mouth shut," Gabriel countered. "You know my habits, you know my schedule. If they ask questions, you won't freeze. You know more about me than any woman I've ever slept with. I know you prefer your shirt starched, and you drink your coffee black. That doesn't make me a convincing wife. It makes you a convincing partner. Castellano respects women who know their place, but he fears women who are sharp." Gabriel pulled a money clip from his pocket. He tossed it onto the coffee table. A thick stack of $100 bills hit the glass with a heavy thud. $10,000 for 3 hours of your time. You eat dinner, you smile, you pretend you tolerate me. Nora looked at the cash. $10,000. It was exactly what she needed for her brother's legal fees. Not that Gabriel knew about the lawyer. Not that Gabriel knew anything about her life outside these walls. To him, she spawned in the foyer at 8 in the morning and despawned at 5. She looked back at him. She didn't smile. "I'll need a dress," she said. Gabriel exhaled the tension bleeding out of his shoulders. "My assistant brought one. It's in the guest room. Be ready in an hour." He turned back to the bar, clearly dismissing her, assuming the transaction was settled. Nora picked up the dust cloth. She didn't run to the guest room. She finished wiping down the credenza. "One rule, Mr. Falco." Nora said her back to him. Gabriel paused, the scotch bottle hovering over his glass. "Excuse me. If I'm doing this, I'm not a submissive prop." She turned to face him, tossing the cloth onto the cart. "If Castellano asks me a question, I answer it how I see fit. You don't interrupt me, and you don't correct me in front of them. If we're a team, we act like one. Otherwise, keep your money." Gabriel stared at her. For a long moment, the air in the penthouse felt dangerously thin. Then the corner of his mouth twitched upward. Not quite a smile, but an acknowledgement. "Get dressed, Nora." The dress was a weapon. Nora stood in front of the full-length mirror in the guest suite. The garment was midnight blue silk, cut with a dangerous understanding of female anatomy. It draped rather than clung, suggesting curves without screaming off them. It was modest enough for an old-school mob boss, but expensive enough to command respect. She pulled her hair out of its severe bun, letting it fall in thick, loose waves over her shoulders. She applied makeup from the vanity set, provided just enough to sharpen her cheekbones and darken her lashes. She didn't look like Nora the housekeeper anymore. She looked like a woman who could hold her own in a room full of wolves, which she reminded herself was precisely what she was about to do. She stepped into the black stiletto heels. They pinched immediately. Wealth always seemed to come with a mild, underlying discomfort. When she walked back into the living room, Gabriel was waiting. He wore a dark charcoal suit, tailored to an inch of its life. He looked up from his phone as she entered. He didn't gasp. He didn't offer a cheesy compliment. His eyes simply swept over her, cataloguing the change, assessing her viability for the task ahead. A brief nod was his only concession. "The coat is by the door," he said. Downstairs, a black Maybach idled at the curb. The driver, a hulking man named Paulie, opened the door. Paulie looked at Nora, blinked twice in rapid succession, but said nothing as she slid into the leather seats. Gabriel climbed in beside her. The cabin smelled of old money and leather polish. The privacy partition rolled up with a soft hum. The narrative, Gabriel began, his voice low, all business, is that we met 6 months ago at a charity gala. I was bored. You spilled champagne on my shoes. I demanded you pay for them. You told me to bill you. I liked your nerve. Nora looked out the tinted window at the blurring city lights. A bit cliché, isn't it? Cliché works. People don't question cliché because it's familiar. Gabriel adjusted his cuffs. You are from upstate. Your parents are retired. You run a boutique consulting firm. What kind of consulting? Financial. It explains why you aren't intimidated by money. And if they ask for specifics, you tell them you signed NDAs and can't discuss your clients. Nora turned her head to look at him. You've thought this through. I pay people to think it through, he corrected. Your name is still Nora. It's easier to remember. My ring. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a velvet box. He flipped it open. Nestled in the black silk was a diamond. It wasn't a gaudy, obnoxious rock. It was an emerald-cut stone, flawless, and blindingly clear set in simple platinum. It was the kind of ring that whispered wealth rather than shouting it. He reached for her left hand. Nora didn't pull away, but her fingers were stiff. Gabriel's hands were warm, calloused along the ridges of his palms. He slid the ring onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Lucky guess, she asked, looking at the stone catching the streetlights. I notice things, Nora, he said quietly. You wear a silver band on your right thumb. I know the diameter. It wasn't hard to calculate. She looked up at him, surprised. The housekeeper, who was supposed to be invisible, hadn't been entirely unseen after all. The car slowed, turning onto a private drive, flanked by wrought-iron gates. They were pulling up to an estate in the hills. Listen to me, Gabriel said, his tone shifting. The corporate detachment faded, replaced by the street-level grit that kept him alive. These people are polite, but they are vipers. Salvatore Castellano is the head. He will test you. He will say things meant to provoke a reaction. You do not show fear. You do not overcompensate by acting tough. You act like you belong there, like you own half the air in the room. And his family, his wife Rosa. She will judge your manners. His sons Dom and Frankie will try to intimidate you. Ignore them. They're blunt instruments. The one you watch out for is his daughter Isabella. She handles their legitimate businesses. She's smarter than her brothers and twice as mean. The Maybach rolled to a smooth stop beneath a sprawling stone portico. Valets in crisp uniforms stood ready. Are we clear? Gabriel asked. Perfectly, Nora said. He looked at her for a long second. You're shaking. It's cold, she lied. Her voice didn't waver. Right. Gabriel opened his door. Showtime. Nora stepped out of the car. The night air was crisp, carrying the scent of pine and expensive cigar smoke. Gabriel came around the back of the car and offered his arm. Nora slipped her hand through the crook of his elbow. The fabric of his suit was rough, but his arm beneath it was solid iron. She took a breath, locking away the housekeeper, locking away the debts, and the grim reality of her real life. They walked up the wide stone steps to the heavy oak double doors. Before Gabriel could even knock, the doors swung inward, revealing a cavernous, chandelier-lit foyer. A man stood in the center. He was older, thick around the middle, with a face carved from weathered stone and eyes like chips of flint. Salvatore Castellano. Gabriel! The old man boomed, his voice echoing off the marble. He spread his arms in a gesture of fake warmth. And this must be the girl who finally put a leash on the wolf. Gabriel smiled, a tight, predatory thing. Salvatore. Meet my fiancée, Nora. Castellano's flinty eyes shifted to Nora. They moved up and down, a blatant, invasive appraisal. Nora didn't shrink back. She met his gaze, her chin tilted up just a fraction of an inch, and held it until the old man was the first to blink. A pleasure, Mr. Castellano. Nora said, her voice smooth as glass. though I wouldn't call it a leash, more of an understanding. Gabriel's arm stiffened beneath her hand. Castellano's eyebrows shot up. A heavy silence fell over the foyer. Nora had just thrown out the script. Salvatore threw his head back and laughed. It was a loud, grating sound that bounced off the marble pillars, utterly devoid of genuine amusement. He clapped a heavy hand on Gabriel's shoulder, his rings biting into the fine wool of the suit. An understanding, Salvatore repeated, his gaze lingering on Nora just a fraction too long. I like that. She's got a spine, Falco. You need that. A man in your position needs someone who won't snap in the wind. Gabriel's smile didn't falter, though the muscles in his jaw locked. She holds her own, Salvatore. Always has. They moved from the foyer into a dining room that felt less like a place to eat and more like a medieval feasting hall. Heavy mahogany crimson drapes and a chandelier that looked like it weighed more than the Maybach parked outside. Nora took a seat. Gabriel sat to her right. The heat radiating from him was palpable. He was furious. She had broken his cardinal rule before they even made it past the welcome mat. The rest of the Castellano family filed in. Rosa Salvatore's wife was a woman entirely constructed of sharp angles and sour expressions. She wore diamonds that looked heavy enough to bruise her collarbones. The two sons, Dom and Frankie, were essentially matching sets of muscle and arrogance. They wore custom suits that couldn't hide the thick, bullish slopes of their shoulders. They looked at Gabriel with naked hostility, and they looked at Nora like she was a steak thrown onto the table. Then came Isabella. Gabriel's warning echoed in Nora's head. Isabella didn't look like a mobster's daughter. She looked like a corporate raider. Her hair was a sleek, dark bob, her suit was pristine white, and her eyes missed nothing. She sat directly across from Nora. Servants appeared like apparitions pouring a dark, heavy Barolo and serving plates of carpaccio. Nora ignored the raw meat. She took a sip of the wine. It tasted like ash and dark fruit. So Nora, Rosa said, slicing into her meat with surgical precision. Gabriel tells us you are in consulting, upstate. That's right, Mrs. Castellano, Nora said. She kept her hands folded loosely in her lap. What kind of consulting? Isabella asked. She didn't look up from her plate, but the question sliced cleanly through the clinking of silverware. Nora felt Gabriel shift beside her. His knee brushed hers under the table. A warning. Asset management, Nora replied smoothly. It wasn't a complete lie. She managed Gabriel's assets every day. She knew exactly how much cash he kept in the floor safe, which suits cost $5,000, and which offshore accounts paid the property taxes. Restructuring inefficiencies for high-net-worth individuals. Isabella finally looked up. Her eyes were dark and flat. Vague. But I suppose your industry thrives on discretion. Tell me what's your philosophy on high-risk portfolios, specifically in volatile markets. We see a lot of volatility in our line of work. It was a trap. Isabella was testing her fluency. If she was an escort, she'd stumble off a generic platitude or look to Gabriel for rescue. Nora didn't look at Gabriel. She picked up her fork. I find that volatility is usually a symptom of poor domestic management. People focus on external threats, market shifts, aggressive competitors. But the real hemorrhage of capital usually happens internally. Undisciplined staff, careless spending, a failure to clear out the rot before it spreads to the foundation. You secure the house first. The market is just weather. A strong house survives the weather. Silence dropped over the table. Dom stopped chewing. Frankie looked confused. Salvatore leaned forward, resting his heavy forearms on the table. Gabriel reached for his wine glass. He took a slow sip, masking a very real, very profound shock. She was describing her job as his housekeeper, wrapped in the sterile language of Wall Street. And it was flawless. Isabella stared at Nora. The corporate mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a flicker of genuine respect. "Secure the house first. I like that. Gabriel has always run a somewhat messy house." "Not anymore," Nora said. She met Isabella's gaze and held it. "I don't tolerate messes." Salvatore let out a low chuckle. "She's a wolf falco." "Where did you find her?" "A charity gala." Gabriel lied smoothly, finally stepping in. He placed a hand over Nora's on the table. His palm was hot. His thumb stroked her knuckles, a pantomime of affection that felt dangerously intimate. She spilled champagne on my shoes, refused to apologize. I was captivated. Rosa sniffed dismissively. "How romantic. Tell me, Nora, are your parents coming down from upstate for the wedding?" "My parents are deceased," Nora said. It was the only completely true thing she had said all night. The sudden bluntness of it caught Rosa off guard. "Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. You have no family then?" "I have a younger brother," Nora said. The thought of Leo sitting in a county holding cell waiting for a lawyer they couldn't afford sent a sharp spike of adrenaline through her chest. She clamped down on it. "He's currently out of the country." "Well," Salvatore raised his glass, "when you marry a falco, you marry his world. You inherit his enemies, his debts, and his risks. You understand this girl?" "I understand. Risk, Mr. Castellano." Nora picked up her glass to meet his toast. "I wouldn't be sitting here if I didn't." The crystal chimed. The dinner moved into its second course. Nora ate mechanically, tasting nothing, acutely aware of the heavy platinum ring on her finger and the loaded gun Gabriel wore in a shoulder holster beneath his jacket. She was in the den. She had survived the first bite, but the night was far from over. Plates were cleared by silent staff who moved like ghosts along the perimeter of the dining room. Dessert was a heavy espresso and tiramisu that no one touched. The pleasantries were over. The air in the room had shifted, growing thick and suffocating. Salvatore leaned back in his chair, lighting a thick cigar. He didn't offer one to Gabriel. It was a calculated slight. "The South Docks," Salvatore said, blowing a cloud of thick blue smoke toward the ceiling. "I hear you're having union trouble, Gabriel. Containers sitting, shipments delayed. Bad for business? Bad for the city." Gabriel's expression remained perfectly neutral. "A minor administrative delay. It's being handled." "Is it?" Dom sneered from across the table. It was the first time he had spoken. His voice was thick, grating. "Because we heard your foreman took a sudden permanent vacation. The new guy doesn't seem to know how to stamp the paperwork fast enough." Gabriel didn't look at Dom. He kept his eyes on Salvatore. "You don't argue with the dog when the master holds the leash." "The paperwork will be stamped by Tuesday. My supply lines are secure." Salvatore tapped his cigar over an ashtray. "Stability, Gabriel. It's what keeps the federales off our backs. It's what keeps the money moving. When a man is unanchored, his business gets sloppy. For a long time, you've been a lone operator. It makes the commission nervous. It makes me nervous." The old man's eyes shifted to Nora. The flinty gaze turned heavy, probing. "A wife changes things," Salvatore continued softly. "It gives a man something to lose. It makes him think twice before starting a war over a delayed shipping container. A man with a family negotiates. A man with nothing burns the house down." He leaned forward. "Are you going to keep him from burning the house down, Nora?" It wasn't a question about her influence. It was a threat. Salvatore was telling Gabriel that Nora was now a target on the board. Gabriel's posture changed. It was a microscopic shift, a tightening of the shoulders, a slight lean forward, but Nora felt it. The corporate veneer cracked, and the street boss bled through. "Nora doesn't manage my business, Salvatore," Gabriel said. His voice was quiet, but it commanded the room. "She manages me. My business is my own, and the South Docks remain mine. If the Commission is nervous, they can audit the books. They'll find profits are up 12% this quarter." Isabella smirked into her espresso cup. Dom looked like he wanted to reach across the table. 12%, Salvatore mused. He studied Gabriel, then looked back at Nora. He seemed to reach a conclusion. The heavy, oppressive tension in the room suddenly dissipated, evaporating like smoke out an open window. Salvatore smiled. "Well, it seems you found yourself a sharp one, Falco. Bring her to the christening next month. Rosa will send the invitation. It was an approval. The deal was safe. Gabriel had passed the test." 10 minutes later, they were walking back down the stone steps to the idling Maybach. The crisp night air hit Nora's face, and she suddenly realized she was covered in a cold sweat. Her knees felt weak, the adrenaline rapidly leaving her system and leaving exhaustion in its wake. Paulie opened the door. They climbed in. The heavy doors shut, sealing them in the quiet, leather-scented cocoon. The partition rolled up immediately. The car began to move down the winding driveway. For 3 long minutes, neither of them spoke. The silence was deafening. Gabriel unbuttoned his jacket. He loosened his tie, mirroring the exact motion he had made hours ago in the penthouse, but the energy was entirely different. He turned his head to look at her. The streetlights flashed through the tinted windows, illuminating the sharp planes of his face in staccato bursts. "You didn't stick to the script," he said. His voice was low, rough around the edges. Nora kept her eyes on the partition in front of them. "Your script was flawed. If I acted like a submissive prop, Isabella would have eaten me alive, and Salvatore wouldn't respect you for marrying a weak woman. He respects power. I told you not to engage them. You paid me $10,000 to make you look stable. I delivered." She finally turned to look at him. "Do you want the ring back now, or when we get to the penthouse?" Gabriel didn't look at her hand. He kept his eyes locked on hers. There was a strange intensity in his gaze, something searching and deeply unsettled. "You lied to Isabella about the asset management. But it didn't sound like a lie." "It wasn't," Nora said tiredly. She leaned her head back against the leather seat, too exhausted to keep her guard up. "I just described cleaning your apartment. You leave cash in the floorboards, you throw out $3,000 suits because they have a coffee stain, and your staff steals your scotch. You bleed capital internally. I secure the house. It's the same principle, just different tax brackets." Gabriel stared at her. A heavy, pregnant silence filled the cabin. He looked at the woman sitting next to him, as if he was seeing her for the first time. Not the housekeeper in the white apron, not the fake fiancé in the blue silk, but the actual woman beneath it all. Sharp, unflinching, desperate enough to take his money, but proud enough to play the game her own way. "Your brother," Gabriel said quietly. Nora stiffened. Her heart gave a hard, painful thump against her ribs. "What?" "At the table. You said he was out of the country. Your pulse spiked. I saw it in your neck." Gabriel shifted closer on the seat. "Where is he, Nora?" She swallowed hard. The deal was over. She had survived the Castellanos. She didn't need to survive Gabriel Falco's interrogations. "That is none of your business, Mr. Falco. The job is done." "Where is he?" Gabriel repeated his voice, dropping a register, losing the boss tone, and finding something dangerously close to human concern. Nora closed her eyes. The exhaustion finally won. "County lockup," she whispered to the dark interior of the car. "Aggravated assault. He got into a fight with a loan shark. I needed the 10 grand for his retainer. Gabriel didn't say anything. He didn't offer pity. Men like him didn't deal in pity. They dealt in leverage. But when he finally spoke, his words sent a cold shiver down her spine. Keep the ring on, Nora. The job isn't done. What do you mean the job isn't done? Nora's voice was sharp, cutting through the heavy silence of the Maybach. She tried to pull her hand away, but the platinum ring felt suddenly like a handcuff. Gabriel didn't move. He kept his eyes locked on the partition separating them from Paulie. Salvatore invited us to the christening. That wasn't a polite social grace, Nora. It was a summons. If I show up next month without you, he knows this was a stunt. He knows I lied to his face at his own dinner table. Then tell him we broke up. Tell him we had a fight. People break up. Not when they just closed a multi-million-dollar shipping negotiation based on their newfound stability, Gabriel countered. His tone was infuriatingly calm, stripped of the street-level tension he'd shown at the estate. He was back in the boardroom. Castellano is paranoid. If you vanish tomorrow, he won't assume a bad breakup. He'll assume a setup. He'll put his men on you. They will find out you're my housekeeper, and they will find out about your brother. Nora's stomach plummeted. The faint trace of the expensive wine she'd sipped turned to battery acid in her throat. Leave Leo out of this. I am trying to, Gabriel said, turning to finally look at her. But you just told me he assaulted a loan shark. Loan sharks in this city don't operate in a vacuum. They kick up to someone. If he's sitting in county, he's a sitting duck. He won't make it to trial. You know this. She did know it. It was the terrifying, cold reality that had kept her awake for 3 straight nights, scrubbing Gabriel's baseboards with a toothbrush just to keep her hands moving. Leo was 22, reckless, and drowning in debts he'd taken on to pay for their mother's hospice care 2 years ago. He was a kid playing in a shark tank, and he had finally been bitten. I have the 10,000, Nora said. Her voice trembled, betraying the iron grip she was trying to keep on her composure. I can pay his retainer. I can get him a lawyer. 10,000 gets you a public defender who bought a slightly better suit, Gabriel said bluntly. It doesn't get you a fixer. It doesn't pay off the debt he owes the shark. And it certainly doesn't buy him protection on the inside. The car turned a sharp corner, the streetlights sweeping across Gabriel's face. He leaned closer. He smelled of scotch and expensive wool, but beneath it was something primal and dangerous. You did me a massive favor tonight, Nora. You saved that deal. Isabella Castellano doesn't respect anyone, but she respected you. I need you to keep playing the part, just until the docks are fully secured. 3 months, tops. 3 months? Nora stared at him, horrified. I agreed to 3 hours. 3 months, Gabriel repeated. You move out of your apartment. You move into the guest suite here. You stop cleaning my floors and you start acting like my fiancé. In exchange, I send my personal attorney to county tomorrow morning. Leo gets bailed out by noon. His debt to the shark vanishes. And when this is over, you walk away with $50,000. Nora shrank back against the leather seat. The offer was a lifeline thrown into a drowning pool, but the rope was made of barbed wire. Moving into the penthouse meant crossing a line she could never uncross. She would be sleeping under the same roof as a man who ordered violence with his morning espresso. I can't just pretend to be in love with you for 3 months, she whispered. You don't have to be in love with me. We're an arranged alliance. Castellano understands alliances better than romance. We just have to look like we belong together. Gabriel reached out his fingers, lightly brushing the stiff line of her jaw. It wasn't a caress. It was an assessment. You stepped out of the background tonight, Nora. You can't just step back in. The wolves have seen you. The Maybach slowed to a halt in the underground garage of his building, the engine cut off. The quiet was absolute. Nora looked down at her hands. The diamond caught the dim garage lighting, throwing fractured rainbows across her knuckles. She thought of Leo, sitting in a concrete cell, terrified and bruised. She thought of the $50,000. She thought of the way Isabella had looked at her not as a servant, but as an equal. I want Leo out by noon. Nora said, her voice hollow. Gabriel gave a short, decisive nod. Consider it done. And the housekeeping? I'll hire a service. Gabriel opened his door. The cold air of the concrete garage rushed in. From tomorrow on, you are Nora Falco, in everything but the paperwork. Get some sleep. Tomorrow we brief the lawyers. Sunlight, brutal and unyielding, streamed through the sheer curtains of the guest bedroom. Nora woke with a violent start, her heart hammering against her ribs. For a split second, she didn't know where she was. The mattress was too soft, the sheets too smooth. Then she saw the blue silk dress draped over the velvet armchair. She sat up, pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. The events of the previous night crashed over her in a wave of exhausting clarity. The dinner, the interrogation, the deal. She was no longer an invisible employee. She was an accomplice. She swung her legs out of bed. Out of habit, she looked for her black uniform dress and the white apron. They weren't there. Instead, she pulled on a pair of faded jeans and a heavy grey sweater she'd brought in her overnight bag. She stripped off the platinum ring, leaving it on the nightstand. She couldn't bear the weight of it yet. Nora walked out into the massive living room. It was painfully clean, exactly as she had left it yesterday afternoon. Voices drifted from the kitchen. She padded silently across the hardwood floor. Gabriel was sitting at the marble island, drinking coffee. He wore a crisp white shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing a sprawl of dark ink on his left forearm that she had never seen before. Across from him stood a man in a sharp slate-grey suit. He had thin wire-rimmed glasses and the tired eyes of a man who spent his life cleaning up other people's blood. Gabriel looked up as she entered. His eyes flicked to her bare left hand, but he didn't comment. "Nora, this is Bennett," Gabriel said, setting his mug down. "He handles my complicated legal matters." Bennett offered a brief, clinical nod. "Miss Nora, Gabriel briefed me on your brother's situation. I need the specifics. Now." Nora walked to the island. She didn't sit. She felt exposed in her jeans and sweater, stripped of the armor the silk dress had provided. "His name is Leo. He's 22. He was arrested 3 nights ago for aggravated assault behind a bar in the South End. Bail was denied because he's considered a flight risk. He owes $20,000 to a man named Mickey Russo." Gabriel's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. The kitchen went deathly still. Bennett slowly took off his glasses. He pulled a microfiber cloth from his breast pocket and began wiping the lenses, a stalling tactic. "Mickey Teeth Russo." "Yes." Nora said, her stomach twisting into a cold knot. "You know him." "Everyone knows Mickey." Gabriel said, his voice dangerously soft. He set the mug down. The casual morning atmosphere had evaporated entirely. "Mickey runs the sports books and the street loans in the South End. But Mickey doesn't own his book." "Who owns it?" Nora asked. "Dom Castellano." Bennett supplied, quietly slipping his glasses back on. The name hit Nora like a physical blow. Dom, the thick-necked, aggressive son who had sneered at them across the dinner table last night. The one who had wanted to rip Gabriel's throat out over the dock dispute. Leo put Dom Castellano's primary loan shark in the hospital, Gabriel stated, rubbing his temples. A grim, humorless smile touched his lips. Well, that certainly complicates the narrative. If Dom finds out the kid who beat up his earner is the brother of the woman you just introduced as your fiancée. Bennett trailed off. He didn't need to finish the sentence. The implication hung in the air heavy as lead. It wouldn't just be an insult. It would be a declaration of war. Dom would see it as Gabriel, using his new family ties to attack the Castellano bottom line. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at Nora's throat. "You said you could get him out. You said you could handle it. I can," Gabriel said, his eyes snapping to hers, hard and resolute. "But the playbook just changed. Bennett, you don't go down there as my lawyer. Dom has guys watching the courthouse. If they see my fixer bailing out the kid who hit Mickey, the guns come out." "Agreed," Bennett said, snapping his briefcase shut. "I'll use a shell firm, an independent contractor. We post bail anonymously through a third-party bondsman. Once the kid is out, we move him. Fast. He can't go back to his apartment. Put him in the safe house, in the Berkshires," Gabriel ordered. "Have Paulie drive him. No stops." Bennett nodded and headed for the door, his phone already pressed to his ear. Nora gripped the edge of the marble island. Her knuckles turned white. "You're sending my brother away." "I'm keeping him alive," Gabriel corrected, standing up. He walked around the island until he was standing inches from her. The height difference was sudden and imposing. "If Mickey wakes up and puts a bounty on Leo, Dom will sanction it. If Leo is sitting in his apartment, he's dead by midnight. I need to see him," Nora demanded, her voice shaking. "I need to explain this to him." "You can't." Gabriel reached out his hand, hovering over hers on the counter, before pulling back. "You don't exist in Leo's world anymore, Nora. If you go anywhere near him, you paint a target on his back and mine. From this second forward, you belong to me. You stay here. You play the part. You let me handle the violence." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the velvet box. He popped it open, the platinum ring gleaming inside. He set it on the marble counter between them. "Put it on," Gabriel said softly. The game started last night, but the war just started today. 3 days bled into one another, marked only by the shifting light against the floor-to-ceiling windows. Nora didn't leave the penthouse. She didn't clean either. Gabriel had ordered a professional service, and watching 2 strangers wipe down the countertops she used to scrub felt like an out-of-body experience. She sat on the velvet sofa, wearing cashmere sweatpants that cost more than her first car-reading financial dossiers Gabriel had left on the coffee table. If she was going to play an asset manager, she needed to know his assets. Gabriel was a ghost. He left before dawn and returned long after sunset, his suits smelling of exhaust fumes and cold ocean air. The docks were bleeding his patience dry. They barely spoke. The penthouse was a gilded cage, and the silence inside it was deafening. Thursday afternoon, the secure elevator hummed. Nora looked up from a quarterly earnings report. Gabriel never came home at 2 in the afternoon. Paulie would have called if someone was being sent up. The heavy oak doors clicked open. Isabella Castellano stepped into the foyer. She wore a camel hair coat draped over her shoulders like a cape and held a silver pastry box tied with baker's twine. She didn't look like a woman dropping in for a neighborly chat. She looked like a predator inspecting a new hunting ground. Nora stood up slowly. She didn't panic. Panic was a luxury she had left behind in her cramped, leaky apartment. She smoothed the front of her sweater, hyper-aware of the heavy platinum ring on her left hand. "Isabella," Nora said. Her voice was perfectly level. "The doorman didn't announce you. I own the building's management company," Isabella replied lightly, slipping off her leather gloves. "I don't do doormen. I hope I'm not interrupting. I brought sfogliatelle from the bakery on Arthur Avenue, my father's favourite. It was a test, a brazen, unannounced invasion to see if the happy couple actually lived together, or if Gabriel was hiding an escort in a hotel downtown. You're not interrupting. I was just reviewing some portfolios. Nora gestured to the kitchen. I'll make espresso. Isabella followed her dark eyes, scanning the living room. She was looking for signs of a bachelor pad. She was looking for an absence of a woman's touch. Nora walked behind the marble island. She didn't hesitate. She didn't have to search for the espresso pods or the sugar or the specific porcelain demitasse cups Gabriel kept on the highest shelf. She knew exactly where they were because she had dusted them every Tuesday for a year. She moved with the fluid, thoughtless grace of a woman who owned the kitchen. Isabella leaned against the counter, watching her intently. Gabriel has always been remarkably protective of his privacy. I've known him for 10 years, and this is the first time I've been inside his home. It's remarkably neat. I don't tolerate clutter, Nora said, locking the portafilter into the machine. The espresso began to brew, filling the air with a dark, bitter aroma. No, I imagine you don't. Isabella opened the pastry box, sliding a flaky ricotta-filled pastry onto a napkin. My father was impressed by you the other night. That takes effort. He usually finds women boring unless they are serving him food or giving him grandchildren. I'm not particularly interested in doing either, Nora said, setting the cup in front of Isabella. Isabella laughed a short, genuine sound. Good. Don't. Dom and Frankie exist to please him. I exist to keep them all out of federal prison. She took a sip of the espresso. Speaking of my brothers, Dom has been in a foul mood this week. One of his associates was hospitalized. A street-level guy, but a good earner. Smashed jaw, 3 broken ribs. Whoever did it vanished. Nora's hand, resting on the marble counter, went perfectly still. She forced her breathing to remain slow, even. Occupational hazard, I assume? Usually, but this feels different. Sloppy. Isabella watched Nora over the rim of her cup. It creates instability. And as we discussed, instability is bad for business. The elevator hummed again. Both women turned as the doors opened. Gabriel stepped out. He stopped dead in his tracks, his eyes darting from Isabella to Nora. The raw tension in his frame was instantly suppressed, buried under a smooth, dangerous smile. Isabella, Gabriel said, walking into the kitchen and loosening his tie. To what do I owe the pleasure? Just bringing a peace offering to your lovely fiancé, Isabella said smoothly, and checking to see if she was real. A man who gets engaged in secret usually has something to hide. Gabriel walked straight to Nora. He didn't hesitate. He wrapped a heavy arm around her waist, pulling her flush against his side, and pressed a brief, firm kiss to her temple. He smelled of rain and gunpowder. Nora's breath hitched, but she leaned into him, letting her hand rest naturally against his chest. I hide her because men like your brothers don't know how to look at a woman without drooling on the floor. Gabriel said, his tone light, but the warning clear. Isabella smirked, picking up her gloves. Fair enough. The christening is Sunday. St. Jude's. Don't be late. My father hates waiting. She walked to the elevator. The doors slid shut, sealing her away. The second the numbers began to drop, Gabriel dropped his arm from Nora's waist. He scrubbed a hand over his face, exhausted. Did she ask about the docs? No, Nora whispered. Her heart was beating frantically against her ribs. She asked about Mickey Russo. She knows someone hit him. She's looking for Leo. Gabriel's head snapped up. His eyes hardened into dark chips of ice. Pack a bag. A small one. We need to be ready to move. Holy water and floor wax. That was the smell of St. Jude's. The cathedral was a massive Gothic structure of stained glass and cold stone, utterly indifferent to the sins of the men filling its pews. Nora sat in the third row, the wooden bench hard against her spine. She wore a tailored black coat dress, a modest fascinator pinned into her hair. Beside her, Gabriel was a statue in a charcoal suit. To the rest of the congregation, they looked like the future of the South Side Syndicate. Wealthy, insulated, untouchable. Nora felt entirely touchable. She felt like she was standing on a trap door. Salvatore Castellano sat in the front row, holding a crying infant in white lace. Dom and Frankie flanked him like gargoyles. Rosa sat beside him, fanning herself aggressively, despite the chill in the church. The priest droned on in Latin. Gabriel's hand slid across the wooden pew and covered Nora's. His fingers were warm. He didn't look at her, keeping his eyes on the altar, but his thumb slowly stroked the side of her hand. It wasn't the possessive, performative grip he had used in front of Isabella. It was a grounding anchor. "I'm here," the touch said. "Hold the line." Bennett moved Leo. Gabriel murmured, barely moving his lips. The Latin chanting masked his voice. "He's in a cabin in the Adirondacks. No cell service. Off the grid. He's safe." Nora let out a breath she felt she had been holding for 3 days. She turned her hand over, intertwining her fingers with his. "Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Mickey woke up yesterday." The cold returned, instantly freezing the relief in her chest. "Did he give a name?" "No, his jaw is wired shut. But Dom has guys shaking down every bartender in the South End. It's only a matter of time before someone gives them a description. Keep your head up. We show no weakness today." The ceremony concluded with a chorus of amens. The congregation spilled out onto the wide stone steps of the church, blinking in the harsh midday sun. Flashbulbs popped from a hired photographer. The reception was held at an exclusive restaurant downtown, rented out entirely by the Castellanos. The air was thick with the smell of roasting garlic, expensive perfume, and violence barely kept in check. Men kissed each other on both cheeks and whispered secrets while slipping envelopes of cash to the baby's parents. Nora stood near the heavy mahogany bar, sipping sparkling water. Gabriel had been pulled into a corner booth by Salvatore and 2 other union bosses. He was negotiating. She was the display piece left to prove she wasn't a liability. "Water," a voice rasped. Not much of a celebration. Nora turned. Dom Castellano stood far too close. He smelled like sour sweat masking stale cologne. His eyes, bloodshot and erratic, dragged slowly down her dress. "I prefer to keep a clear head, Dom," Nora said evenly. She didn't step back. Stepping back was prey behavior. "A clear head," Dom mocked, leaning his heavy forearm on the bar. "That's good. Gabriel needs that. He's been slipping lately. Too many headaches on the South Docks. And now my guy Mickey gets his skull cracked by some nameless punk." Nora took a slow sip of her water. The glass was freezing against her lips. "I heard. I hope he recovers. He will. But the kid who did it won't." Dom leaned closer, his voice dropping to a gravelly whisper. "I got a description this morning. Young kid. Brown hair. Looked desperate. He left a bloody jacket behind the dumpster. Left a pay stub in the pocket." The floor seemed to drop out from under Nora. A sudden rushing sound filled her ears. "Leo." Leo was sloppy. He always forgot to empty his pockets. If Dom had the pay stub, he had the name. "You look pale, Nora." Dom smiled. It was a vicious, yellowed thing. "You know something about desperate kids. I know Gabriel doesn't like men crowding his fiancée." A voice cut in cold as a razor blade. Gabriel materialized beside them. He didn't touch Dom. He didn't raise his voice or his hands. But the sheer localized gravity of his presence shoved Dom back a physical step. Just making conversation, Falco. Dom sneered, holding his hands up in mock surrender. Telling the little lady about the rat problem we're cleaning up. Your rats aren't my concern, Gabriel said. He stepped smoothly between Dom and Nora, a physical shield. Keep them on your side of the city. We're leaving. Dom laughed, turning away. Sure thing, Gabriel. Enjoy the peace while it lasts. Gabriel didn't wait. He grabbed Nora's hand, his grip tight enough to bruise, and walked her straight out of the restaurant. They bypassed Salvatore. They bypassed the valet. Gabriel practically dragged her down the block to where Paulie was idling in an alleyway. He threw the door open and shoved her inside, diving in after her. Drive, he barked at Paulie. Now! The car shot out of the alley. The partition slammed up. Nora was shaking violently. The adrenaline crash hit her like a freight train. He knows. She choked out her hands, covering her mouth. Gabriel, he knows. He found a pay stub. He has Leo's name. Gabriel was already pulling his sidearm from his shoulder holster. He checked the magazine with mechanical precision, his face a mask of terrifying, utter calm. He slapped the magazine back in and chambered a round. Then the negotiation is over, Gabriel said. He slid the gun back into the leather rig. He turned to her. She was trembling, staring at him with wide, terrified eyes. The professional distance, the contract, the money, it all vanished. He reached out his large hands, cupping her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, firm and desperately gentle. Look at me, Gabriel commanded softly. Nora, look at me. She met his eyes. They weren't cold anymore. They were burning. Dom Castellano will not touch your brother. He will not touch you. Gabriel swore the words laced with absolute violent certainty. Because tonight, I am burning their house down. Rain slashed against the tinted glass of the Maybach, distorting the city lights into bleeding streaks of neon. Gabriel was on his phone before the car even merged onto the expressway. His voice was a low mechanical bark, issuing orders that dismantled a decade of fragile peace in less than 2 minutes. He wasn't a businessman anymore. The veneer was gone, replaced by a cold, terrifying efficiency. Nora watched him, her chest tight, realizing she had just triggered a gang war. Pull the crew from the south docks. Gabriel ordered his eyes, tracking the taillights ahead. All of them. Send 2 cars to the Adirondack cabin. Nobody gets within a mile of that kid. Then meet me at the armory. He hung up and tossed the phone onto the leather seat. He didn't look at Nora. He was already doing the violent calculus of the night ahead. You're throwing away the south side, Nora said, her voice barely audible over the hum of the tires. Salvatore will sanction you. The commission will vote you out. Over me. Gabriel finally turned to her. The streetlights washed over his face, highlighting the exhaustion and the grim resolve carved into his features. Salvatore is an old man playing a young man's game. He relies on his sons to hold the line. Dom crosses me, he pays. That's the only currency this city understands. If I let him touch your family, I have no authority left to lose. Take me to the penthouse, Nora said. Gabriel frowned, the violent mask slipping for a fraction of a second. Paulie is taking you to the underground vault at the financial district. You'll be secure there with my guards. No. Nora sat up straighter. The trembling in her hands had stopped, replaced by a cold, sharp adrenaline. Dom runs his street operations through the offshore accounts Isabella set up. The dossiers you gave me, I read them. Gabriel stared at her. You read the Castellano financial routing. I used to dust your desk, Gabriel. I know your passwords. I know how your shell companies interact with theirs. She swallowed hard, meeting his dark gaze without flinching. If you go in guns blazing, Dom will call for backup. But if I log into the Cayman portals and trigger a mass fraud alert on his routing numbers, his accounts lock down. His street soldiers don't get paid tonight. You hit a man who can't pay his army doesn't fight. A heavy loaded silence filled the cabin. Paulie's eyes flicked to the rearview mirror, but he said nothing. His hands gripped tight on the steering wheel. Gabriel looked at the woman sitting next to him. She wasn't shrinking into the leather. She wasn't asking for permission. She was leaning forward, offering him a tactical advantage that no mob enforcer could provide. "Penthouse," Gabriel commanded. They hit the ground running. The penthouse, usually a sanctuary of quiet luxury, transformed instantly into a war room. Men in tactical gear filtered in through the service elevator, smelling of wet asphalt and gun oil. Nora ignored them. She sat at Gabriel's massive mahogany desk, his encrypted laptop open in front of her. Her fingers flew across the keyboard. She wasn't a hacker. She was an administrator. She knew how banking algorithms worked, and she knew exactly how to trigger an automated freeze. 3 minutes, she called out, over the low murmur of men loading magazines. Gabriel walked over to the desk. He wore a heavy black tactical vest over his dress shirt, the sleeves rolled up to expose the ink on his forearms. He leaned over her shoulder, watching the screen illuminate her face in the dark room. "Routing numbers flagged," Nora muttered, her eyes darting across the text. "Initiating the transfer block. They'll think it's a federal audit. The system locks for 48 hours automatically." She hit the final key. The screen flashed a green confirmation block. "Done. Dom's operational cache is frozen." Gabriel placed a heavy hand on her shoulder. He squeezed a grounding, solid pressure. "You stay away from the windows. You don't open the door for anyone but me." She turned her chair to look at him. "Come back." It wasn't a request from a housekeeper. It was a demand from a partner. Gabriel leaned down, his face inches from hers. He didn't kiss her. He rested his forehead against hers for a fleeting, desperate second, anchoring himself to her gravity. Always. The apartment emptied. The silence that followed was suffocating. Nora sat in the dark for 3 hours. She didn't pace. She sat on the velvet sofa, her knees pulled to her chest, listening to the rain lash against the glass. The platinum ring on her left hand felt incredibly heavy, anchoring her to the reality of what she had done. She had crossed the Rubicon. There was no returning to $40 an hour and a quiet apartment. She was in the blood now. At 2 a.m, the heavy oak doors clicked open. Nora stood up, her heart slamming against her ribs, the breath caught in her throat. Gabriel stepped into the foyer. He was alone. The tactical vest was gone. His white shirt was torn at the collar, and a dark smear of blood stained his left sleeve, but he was walking under his own power. He looked exhausted, stripped down to the bone. Nora crossed the room before he could even close the door. She didn't hesitate. She threw her arms around his neck, burying her face against his solid chest. He smelled of smoke copper and rain. Gabriel let out a ragged breath, wrapping his arms fiercely around her waist, lifting her feet off the floor. He buried his face in her neck, holding her like she was the only real thing left in the world. "It's done," he murmured against her skin. His voice was hoarse, hollowed out. "Dom is gone. He won't be a problem for anyone ever again. Salvatore called a truce. He didn't want the war either. Not once he realized Dom was broke and isolated." Nora pulled back just enough to look at his face. She reached up her thumb, brushing a smear of dirt and blood from his jawline. "Leo, safe. Bennett is setting him up with a new identity out west. Clean slate." Gabriel caught her hand, pulling it down from his face, and pressed a long kiss to her palm. He looked down at the platinum ring resting on her finger. "The 3 months are up," Nora whispered. Gabriel met her eyes. The street boss was gone. The ruthless warlord was gone. The man standing in front of her was just a man who had burned down his own empire to keep her safe. Only if you want them to be, Gabriel said quietly. Keep the ring, Nora. Let me earn the right to put it there. Nora didn't take it off. She leaned up and kissed him, tasting rain and the bitter edge of survival. It was a messy, desperate kiss, sealing a contract written in blood and trust. She was his wife, and she wasn't pretending anymore. What a wild, explosive finale. Gabriel proved he isn't just a ruthless syndicate boss. He's a man who will risk his entire empire to protect the woman he loves. Nora stepped completely out of the shadows, using her brilliant mind to lock down Dom's operation and save her brother's life. They started as a desperate business transaction, but they ended as true equal partners in a dangerous world. If you loved this intense, grounded Mafia romance, smash that like button right now, share this video with your fellow romance fans, and subscribe for more gripping audio stories.